The sun hadn't yet broken over the horizon at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California, but Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was already awake. At 32 years old, she'd been in the Navy for 10 years, serving as a combat medic in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. But today was different. Today, she was beginning a special assignment that would put her in a room full of the Navy's elite, SEAL candidates going through basic underwater demolition training. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, running her fingers over the tattoo on her left forearm. It was a simple design, a ship's anchor with a red medical cross at its center, surrounded by waves. Below it were numbers, 815-2019. Most people who saw it thought it was just another military tattoo. They had no idea what it really meant. She pulled on her Navy working uniform, tucking the sleeves down carefully. The tattoo would be visible during physical training, but there was nothing she could do about that. It was part of her now, as permanent as the memories that came with it. Sarah had been selected for a unique role. The Navy was running a pilot program, integrating experienced female medical officers into SEAL training to evaluate emergency response protocols. She wasn't there to become a SEAL. She was there to observe, to advise, and to be ready if any of the candidates got hurt during the brutal training exercises. It was an honor, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. The SEAL community was a brotherhood, and not everyone was happy about a woman being present, even in a support role. When she arrived at the training compound, the sky was turning pink. Groups of candidates were already running on the beach, their boots pounding against the sand in perfect rhythm. Sarah checked in at the main office, where a gruff master chief looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "You the medical observer?" he asked. "Yes, Master Chief. Lieutenant Mitchell reporting as ordered." He grunted and handed her a folder. "Training starts at 0600. You'll be observing the Hell Week candidates. Stay out of the way unless there's a medical emergency. Understood?" "Understood, Master Chief." Sarah made her way to the observation area where several other instructors were gathering. She could feel their eyes on her, sizing her up. She was used to it. In 10 years of military service, she'd faced doubt and skepticism more times than she could count. But she'd also proven herself again and again. The candidates began gathering for morning physical training. There were about 40 of them, all men, all in peak physical condition. They looked young to Sarah. Most were probably in their early 20s, though their eyes already held the serious determination of warriors in the making. One of the senior instructors, a weathered SEAL named Chief Petty Officer Daniels, walked past her. He stopped and turned back, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her exposed forearm during her pre-training equipment check. "What's that tattoo supposed to be, Lieutenant?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "It's personal, Chief," Sarah replied calmly. He snorted. "Personal, right. You know, back in my day, we didn't hand out participation trophies. You actually had to earn your place here." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm aware, Chief. I'm here to do my job just like everyone else." As the morning progressed, Sarah noticed some of the candidates pointing at her tattoo during their brief water breaks. She heard whispers, saw smirks. During lunch, one particularly arrogant candidate named Morrison, a former college football star who carried himself like he'd already made it through training, spoke loud enough for her to hear. "Check out the pretty anchor tattoo," he said to his buddies. "Bet she got it at some strip mall tattoo parlor to look tough, probably never even been on a ship." His friends laughed. Sarah felt a familiar burn in her chest, not anger at them, but something deeper. They didn't know. They couldn't know. She thought about saying something, about putting Morrison in his place. But she'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting with words. Instead, she turned back to her medical supplies, organizing and reorganizing them with practiced precision. That afternoon, during an especially brutal surf torture exercise, one of the candidates started showing signs of hypothermia. Sarah was there in seconds, her training taking over. She pulled him from the water, assessed his condition, and began treatment with a calm efficiency that came from years of experience in combat zones. The instructors watched her work. She could feel their evaluation, their judgment. When the candidate was stable and being transported to the medical facility, Chief Daniels approached her again. "Not bad, Lieutenant," he said grudgingly. "But medical work is different from being in the fight. This program you're observing, these men are training to face death, real combat. No offense, but I doubt that pretty little tattoo represents anything close to what they're preparing for." Sarah met his eyes. For a moment, she considered telling all of them, but instead, she simply nodded. "I'll let my work speak for itself, Chief." As the sun set over the Pacific, Sarah returned to her apartment, exhausted. She looked at the tattoo again, tracing the numbers with her finger. August 15, 2019. The day that changed everything. The day she learned what it really meant to be a warrior. They would find out eventually, she thought. They always did. The next morning came with the sound of explosions. Hell Week had begun, 5.5 days of continuous training with a maximum total of 4 hours of sleep. Sarah reported to the medical observation station at 4 in the morning, knowing that the next week would test everyone involved, not just the candidates. The instructors were relentless. The candidates ran, swam, carried boats on their heads, and endured surf torture in the cold Pacific waters. Sarah watched with a professional eye, ready to intervene if anyone's life was in danger, but also knowing that part of the training was learning to push past what seemed like human limits. Morrison, the arrogant candidate, was actually performing well. He was strong, fast, and seemed to have endless endurance. But he was also getting more vocal about Sarah's presence. During a brief break on the second day, while candidates were shivering in wet uniforms, Morrison made sure his voice carried to where Sarah stood. "I heard the lieutenant got this assignment because the Navy's trying to prove a point," he said. "You know, diversity and all that. Wonder if she's ever actually seen combat, or if she just patched up paper cuts in some nice safe office." Several other candidates laughed, though a few looked uncomfortable. One older candidate named Garcia, who Sarah had noticed was more mature than the others, told Morrison to shut up and focus on training. "What?" Morrison said. "I'm just saying, we're out here dying, and she's standing there with her cute little tattoo taking notes. Probably going to write a book about how brave she is for watching us suffer." Chief Daniels, who was nearby, didn't stop Morrison. In fact, Sarah saw him smirk slightly. The message was clear. She wasn't one of them, and they weren't going to protect her from criticism. Sarah felt the old familiar ache in her chest, but she pushed it down. She'd faced worse than words. Much worse. On day 3 of Hell Week, things got serious. During a nighttime exercise, one of the candidates, a young kid named Peterson from Iowa, got tangled in rope during an underwater drill. By the time they pulled him out, he wasn't breathing. Sarah was running before anyone had to call her. She reached Peterson in seconds, immediately beginning CPR. The world narrowed to just her and the candidate. Compress, compress, compress. Breathe. She'd done this before in a dusty street in Kandahar, in the back of a helicopter over Helmand province, in situations where death seemed certain. "Come on, Peterson," she said firmly. "You don't quit, not today." After what felt like hours but was probably 90 seconds, Peterson gasped and coughed up water. Sarah quickly turned him on his side, monitoring his breathing, checking his pulse. The instructors stood in a circle around her, watching silently. "He needs to go to the hospital," Sarah said, looking up at Chief Daniels. "Now." "Agreed," Daniels said, and for the first time there was something like respect in his voice. As the medics took Peterson away, he would recover fully and return to training the next class. Sarah stood and found Morrison staring at her. There was something different in his expression now, but the arrogance was still there. "Nice work, Lieutenant," he said. "But saving one guy from a training accident isn't exactly combat medicine." Garcia stepped forward. "Morrison, seriously, shut your mouth." "It's fine," Sarah said quietly. She looked at Morrison directly. "You're right, it's not the same as combat. Training accidents happen in controlled environments. Combat is different." She walked away before anyone could respond, but she felt the weight of their stares on her back. That night, alone in the medical station, Sarah allowed herself a moment of emotion. She pulled up her sleeve and looked at the tattoo again. The anchor, the cross, the date. She thought about that day in Afghanistan, the day that earned her the Navy Cross, one of the highest military decorations for valor in combat. She thought about the ambush, the explosion, the screaming. She thought about the 8 Marines she'd saved that day, pulling them one by one from a burning vehicle while under enemy fire. She thought about the 2 she couldn't save, no matter how hard she tried. The tattoo represented the anchor she'd thrown to those men, a lifeline, a hope, a promise that someone was fighting for them. The date was when everything changed, when she stopped being just a medic and became something more. But Sarah had never been one to advertise her accomplishments. The Navy Cross sat in a drawer at home. She didn't wear it, didn't talk about it. The men she'd saved knew what she'd done. That was enough. Or at least it had been enough until she'd come here and faced the constant dismissal, the casual disrespect. She was tired. Not physically, she'd learned to push past physical exhaustion years ago, but emotionally she was wearing down. On day 5 of Hell Week, during a particularly brutal surf torture session, Morrison collapsed. Not from weakness, but from a severe muscle cramp that locked up his entire right leg. Sarah was there immediately, working to release the cramp, monitoring him for signs of rhabdomyolysis, a dangerous condition where muscle breakdown could damage the kidneys. As she worked on his leg, Morrison looked up at her, pain written across his face. "Why do you even care?" he asked. "After everything I've said." Sarah didn't stop working. "Because it's my job, and because you deserve the chance to finish what you started, even if you're an idiot." Despite his pain, Morrison almost smiled. "Fair enough, Lieutenant." The cramp released, and Morrison was able to continue training. As Sarah walked back to her station, she noticed several of the candidates watching her with new expressions, not quite respect, but maybe the beginning of it. Chief Daniels approached her later that evening. "You're good at your job, Lieutenant. I'll give you that." "Thank you, Chief." He looked at her tattoo again. "That date, August 15, 2019, was that when you got it?" "No," Sarah said. "That was when I earned it." Daniels nodded slowly, like he was starting to piece something together. But before he could ask more, an alarm sounded. Another candidate needed medical attention, and Sarah was running again. Hell Week ended with 28 candidates still standing. 12 had quit or been medically dropped. Morrison had made it through, as had Garcia and most of the stronger candidates. Sarah had worked almost nonstop for 5 days, treating everything from hypothermia to jellyfish stings to potential stress fractures. She was exhausted but satisfied. She'd done her job well. The candidates were given a day to recover before regular training resumed. Sarah spent the time catching up on sleep and writing her preliminary report on the medical observation program. Her conclusions were clear. Having an experienced combat medic on standby during training could save lives and allowed for better immediate assessment of injuries. When training resumed, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. The candidates who remained were different now. They'd been through something that had broken many others, and they'd survived. There was a quiet pride in their bearing. Morrison, to his credit, had stopped making comments about Sarah's presence. He still had his arrogance, but it was tempered now. Once, when another candidate made a dismissive comment about the nurse babysitter, Morrison actually told him to knock it off. Sarah noticed, but she didn't acknowledge it. She had bigger concerns. Word had come down that morning that Commander James Reeves would be visiting the training compound. Reeves was a legend in the SEAL community, a veteran of countless operations, a man who'd earned every medal short of the Medal of Honor, and someone known for his no-nonsense assessment of people and programs. He was coming specifically to evaluate the Medical Observer program, which meant he was coming to evaluate Sarah. She spent the morning making sure all her documentation was in order, that her medical station was inspection-ready, and that she looked professional. She'd met high-ranking officers before, but Commander Reeves had a reputation that preceded him. He was fair but brutally honest, and he didn't suffer fools or incompetence. At precisely 1000 hours, a black SUV pulled up to the training compound. Commander Reeves stepped out, and Sarah immediately understood why he inspired such respect. He was probably in his late 40s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of presence that made everyone around him stand a little straighter. His uniform held ribbons representing valor, service, and sacrifice. Chief Daniels and the other senior instructors gathered to brief him. Sarah stood at a respectful distance, waiting to be called over. She could see them talking, saw Daniels gesture toward her once or twice. Reeves nodded, his face unreadable. Then he started walking toward her. Sarah came to attention. "Commander Reeves, sir, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell." "At ease, Lieutenant," Reeves said. His voice was deep, authoritative. "I'm here to see how this program is working. Chief Daniels tells me you've been performing well." "I've done my best, sir." "Tell me about Hell Week. Any concerns from a medical standpoint?" For the next 20 minutes, Sarah gave Commander Reeves a detailed briefing on everything she'd observed. She talked about hypothermia protocols, the Peterson drowning incident, patterns she'd noticed in injuries, and recommendations for improving medical response times. Reeves listened intently, asking sharp questions that showed he understood both the medical and operational sides of training. "You seem very experienced for your rank and age," Reeves observed. "What's your background?" 10 years in the Navy, sir. I've served as a combat medic in Afghanistan and Iraq, multiple deployments." "Combat experience," Reeves nodded. "That's good. These candidates need to know that the medical personnel supporting them understand what they'll face in the real world." He glanced down at her forearm, where the tattoo was visible below her rolled-up sleeve. Sarah saw his eyes focus on it, saw something change in his expression. He went very still. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said slowly, "may I ask about your tattoo?" Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "It's personal, sir." "The date, August 15, 2019. That's specific." Reeves was staring at her now with an intensity that made her want to step back. "Were you in Afghanistan then? Helmand Province?" Sarah swallowed. "Yes, sir." The training yard had gone quiet. The candidates, who'd been doing exercises nearby, had stopped to watch the commander's inspection. Chief Daniels and the other instructors were watching too, curious about what had captured Reeves's attention. "Were you with the Marines? 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines?" Reeves's voice had changed. It was softer now, almost gentle. "Yes, sir. I was attached to their unit as a combat medic." Commander Reeves took a step closer. His eyes were locked on the tattoo, on the anchor and the cross and the numbers. When he looked up at Sarah's face, there were tears in his eyes. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Your ghost angel." Sarah felt her own eyes burning. She hadn't heard that name in years. The Marines had given it to her after that day, Ghost Angel, because she'd appeared like an angel in the middle of hell and refused to let them die. "Sir," she started, but Reeves was already stepping back. In one smooth motion, Commander James Reeves, legendary SEAL, warrior commander, came to attention and saluted her. The entire training yard froze. In military protocol, officers didn't salute each other in working uniforms in informal settings, and commanders certainly didn't salute lieutenants. But Reeves stood there, rigid, his salute perfect, his face filled with emotion. "My nephew," Reeves said, his voice carrying across the silent yard. "Lance Corporal David Reeves, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, August 15, 2019. He was in that vehicle. You pulled him out. You saved his life." Sarah's hand slowly came up to return the salute, tears now streaming down her face. "Sir, I was just doing my job." "You ran through enemy fire 6 times, Reeves said. "The after-action report said the vehicle was surrounded, that the insurgents were advancing, and you went back into the kill zone again and again. You stayed with the wounded for 40 minutes, treating them under fire until the QRF arrived. You saved 8 Marines that day, 8 men who got to go home to their families." He lowered his salute, but his eyes never left hers. "David came home. He finished his service. He's a father now, Lieutenant. His daughter is 2 years old. She exists because you didn't let him die in that burning vehicle." The silence in the training yard was absolute. Morrison stood with his mouth open. Garcia had tears in his eyes. Chief Daniels looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "The Navy Cross," Reeves continued. "I read the citation. It didn't do justice to what you did that day. Nothing could." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Your nephew is a good man, sir. They all were. I wish I could have saved all of them." "You saved the ones you could," Reeves said. "And you did it with courage that most people can't even imagine." He turned to address the entire compound, his voice rising to carry to everyone present. "For those of you who don't know, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell holds the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. On August 15, 2019, she repeatedly exposed herself to enemy fire to rescue and treat wounded Marines. She is one of the most decorated medical officers in the Navy." He turned back to Sarah. "And you didn't think that was worth mentioning?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm not here to talk about the past, sir. I'm here to do my job." The rest of the day passed in a blur. After Commander Reeves's revelation, the atmosphere in the entire training compound had shifted dramatically. The candidates who had mocked Sarah, who had dismissed her as just an observer with a pretty tattoo, now couldn't meet her eyes. But it wasn't shame that Sarah saw in their faces. It was awe and something deeper. Understanding. Morrison approached her late in the afternoon, after the candidates had finished a grueling run. He stood at attention, even though protocol didn't require it. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, "I owe you an apology, a real one." Sarah looked at him. "Candidate Morrison." "Please, ma'am, let me say this." He took a breath. "I was an arrogant fool. I judged you without knowing anything about you. I made assumptions based on, I don't even know what. Stupidity, I guess. You've done more, seen more, and sacrificed more than I can even imagine, and I mocked you for it. I'm sorry." Sarah was quiet for a moment. She'd received apologies before, from people who'd underestimated her. But something in Morrison's voice told her this one was genuine. "Apology accepted," she said. "But Morrison, let me tell you something. You don't need to have combat experience or medals to deserve respect. Every one of you candidates out here is pushing yourself to the limit, trying to become something greater. That deserves respect too. What you need to learn is that you can't judge people by their appearance, their gender, or your assumptions about their experience. You have to look deeper." Morrison nodded slowly. "I'm learning that, ma'am, the hard way." "The hard way is sometimes the only way the lesson sticks," Sarah said. "Now get back to training." "Yes, ma'am." Morrison started to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, Lieutenant, you're tougher than most of us will ever be." As evening approached, Chief Daniels found Sarah in the medical station. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking uncomfortable. "Can I come in, Lieutenant?" "Of course, Chief." Daniels entered and stood there, a man who'd spent 30 years in the Navy suddenly looking uncertain. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology, too. I was dismissive of you from day one. I saw a woman, a lieutenant, someone I assumed was here because of politics or quotas or whatever excuse I made up. I didn't see a warrior. I didn't see someone who'd proven herself in the worst possible circumstances." Sarah shook her head. "Chief, you didn't know." "I should have known better," Daniels interrupted. "I've been in the Navy long enough to know that courage doesn't have a gender. I've seen it in men and women both. But I fell into the same old trap, the same old prejudices, and I'm ashamed of that." "Thank you for saying that," Sarah said sincerely. Daniels looked at her tattoo. "Can I ask about the anchor? Why that symbol?" Sarah touched the tattoo gently. "When you're drowning, an anchor is the last thing you want. It drags you down. But when you're adrift in a storm, an anchor is what saves you. It holds you steady. That day, for those Marines, I tried to be their anchor, something solid in the chaos, something that held them to life when everything was trying to drag them down into death." "And the cross?" "For the ones I couldn't save," Sarah said quietly. "To remember that no matter how hard you try, sometimes you can't save everyone, but you still have to try." Daniels nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Commander Reeves called the training together. He wants to address everyone at 1800 hours. I think you should be there." At 6 o'clock, all the remaining candidates, instructors, and support staff gathered in the main briefing room. Commander Reeves stood at the front, his bearing commanding respect without effort. "I came here today to evaluate a program," he began. "A pilot program to integrate medical observers into SEAL training. I've completed my evaluation, and I'm recommending that this program be made permanent and expanded. But that's not why I called you all here." He paused, looking around the room. "I called you here because I witnessed something today that needs to be addressed. I saw a decorated combat veteran being treated with disrespect and casual dismissal. I saw people making judgments based on nothing more than prejudice and assumption. And that's not who we are. That's not what the Navy is supposed to be." His voice grew harder. "Some of you candidates mocked Lieutenant Mitchell. You saw a woman with a tattoo and assumed she was soft, that she didn't belong here, that she hadn't earned her place. You were wrong. Completely, embarrassingly wrong." Morrison and several other candidates shifted uncomfortably. "Lieutenant Mitchell has seen more combat than most of the people in this room," Reeves continued. "She has saved lives under conditions that would break most people. She holds the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. She is exactly the kind of warrior this Navy needs, and the fact that some of you couldn't see that tells me we still have work to do." He let that sink in before continuing. "Here's what I want you to understand. Being a SEAL, being a warrior, isn't just about physical strength. It's not just about being able to run fast or shoot straight or hold your breath for a long time. It's about courage. It's about sacrifice. It's about being willing to put yourself in harm's way for others. And Lieutenant Mitchell has demonstrated all of those qualities in the most real, most dangerous circumstances possible." Garcia raised his hand. "Sir, permission to speak." "Go ahead, candidate." Garcia stood. "Sir, I think I speak for all of us when I say we've learned an important lesson today. We were wrong about Lieutenant Mitchell, and we're grateful for the education. She's shown us what real strength looks like, and it's not what we expected." Several other candidates nodded in agreement. Reeves looked at Sarah, who was standing off to the side. "Lieutenant, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Sarah stepped forward, feeling dozens of eyes on her. She thought about everything she'd been through, the combat, the losses, the struggles to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field. She thought about the men she'd saved and the men she'd lost. And she thought about these candidates, young warriors trying to become something greater. "I'm not here because I want to prove anything," she said. "I'm here to help keep you safe while you train to do one of the hardest jobs in the world. Every one of you who makes it through this training will go on to do incredible things. You'll face dangers I can't even imagine. And some of you might need a medic someday, in some dusty street or mountain pass or wherever the mission takes you. When that day comes, I hope you'll remember that the person treating your wounds, the person fighting to keep you alive, is doing it because they're a warrior too. Gender doesn't matter. Rank doesn't matter. What matters is the courage to stand up when everyone else is falling down." She paused, emotion thick in her throat. "You don't owe me an apology for doubting me, but you owe it to yourselves to learn from this. Don't judge people by what you see on the surface. Judge them by their actions, their character, their willingness to sacrifice for something greater than themselves." The room was silent. Then Garcia started clapping. Morrison joined him. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding, candidates, instructors, everyone. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but she held them back. This was a moment of strength, not weakness. Commander Reeves walked over to her and shook her hand. "Thank you, Lieutenant, for your service, for your sacrifice, and for showing these young warriors what real courage looks like." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "And please tell your nephew that I think about them all, every day." "I will," Reeves promised. "He thinks about you too. They all do. You're part of their story now forever." As the briefing ended and people filed out, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not just respect, but acceptance. She'd proven herself once again, but this time felt different. This time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. 3 months had passed since Commander Reeves's visit. The medical observer program had been approved and expanded, and Sarah was now helping to train other combat medics who would fill similar roles at training facilities across the Navy. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and she felt like she was making a real difference. The candidates she'd observed had moved on in their training. Morrison had graduated from Bud S and was now in the pipeline to become a full-fledged SEAL. Before he left, he'd come to see her one last time. "I wanted to thank you," he'd said. "Not just for the medical support, but for teaching me something important. I was so focused on being the toughest, the strongest, the best, that I forgot what really matters. You showed me that strength comes in different forms, and that the most important strength is the willingness to sacrifice for others." "You're going to be a good SEAL," Sarah had told him. "Just remember that lesson when you're out there leading men." "I will, ma'am, I promise." Garcia had also graduated, as had most of the candidates who'd made it through Hell Week. The program had a success rate that exceeded expectations, and Sarah's medical interventions had prevented several serious injuries from becoming career-ending conditions. But the real change wasn't in the statistics or the success rates. It was in the culture. Word had spread throughout the SEAL community about the lieutenant with the Navy Cross, the combat medic who'd proven herself in the worst possible circumstances. Sarah had become a symbol of sorts, proof that courage and capability weren't determined by gender, but by character and action. She'd received calls from female sailors across the Navy, women who'd heard her story and were inspired by it. Some wanted advice on how to handle discrimination or doubt. Others just wanted to talk to someone who understood the unique challenges of being a woman in combat roles. Sarah did her best to help them all, remembering how lonely she'd felt early in her career, when there were few examples to follow. One afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her office. A young woman in Marine Corps fatigues stood at the door, looking nervous. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I'm Corporal Jennifer Hayes. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a few minutes." "Of course," Sarah said. "Come in." Jennifer entered and sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm thinking about trying out for the Marine Raiders program. I'd be one of the first women to attempt it, but I'm scared. Not of the physical challenges, I know I can handle those. But I'm scared of being dismissed, of being seen as just a diversity checkbox, of having to prove myself every single day." Sarah listened, recognizing so much of herself in this young woman's fears. "I heard about what happened at SEAL training," Jennifer continued. "How the candidates mocked you, how you dealt with it, how Commander Reeves revealed your story. It gave me hope. But it also scared me, because if someone with your credentials and experience still faces that kind of treatment, what chance do I have?" Sarah leaned forward. "Jennifer, let me tell you something. Yes, you'll face doubts. Yes, you'll have to prove yourself, probably more than your male counterparts. Yes, it will be hard, harder than it should be. But here's what I've learned. Every challenge, every moment of doubt, every person who underestimates you is an opportunity to become stronger. Not physically stronger, but stronger in your sense of self, in your commitment to your mission." "But how do you keep going when it feels like everyone's against you?" "You remember why you started," Sarah said. "For me, it was never about proving women could do the job. It was about saving lives. That's what got me through the hard days, knowing that my skills, my training, my presence could mean the difference between someone living or dying. Find your why and hold on to it." Jennifer nodded slowly. "My brother is a Marine Raider. He was wounded in Syria. The medics saved his life. I want to be able to do that for someone else's brother, someone else's family." "Then you're doing it for the right reasons," Sarah said. "And you'll succeed because you have purpose beyond just proving a point." They talked for another hour, Sarah sharing stories from her career, offering practical advice on handling discrimination and doubt. When Jennifer left, she stood taller, her confidence renewed. A week later, Sarah received an email from Commander Reeves. His nephew David wanted to meet her, to thank her in person. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the base. David Reeves was 27 now, a fit young man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the injuries from that day in Afghanistan. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, and his voice caught. "I've wanted to meet you for 5 years." "Please call me Sarah," she said. "And I've wanted to meet you too. How are you doing?" "I'm good, really good. David pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of a beautiful little girl with dark curls and a bright smile. "This is Emma, my daughter. She's 2. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "She's beautiful." "She wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you," David said. "When I was in that vehicle, when the fire was spreading and the enemy was closing in, I thought I was dead. I'd made peace with it. But then you appeared. I remember your voice telling me I wasn't allowed to quit, telling me you were going to get me out. And you did." He reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "I live with the memory of that day every single day, the friends we lost, the pain, the fear. But I also live with gratitude. You gave me my life back. You gave me the chance to meet my wife, to become a father, to have all of this." Sarah was crying now, unable to hold back the tears. "I think about all of you too, every single one. I wish I could have saved them all." "The ones you saved will never forget you," David said. "We've stayed in touch, those of us who made it. We talk about you sometimes, about Ghost Angel. You're part of our brotherhood forever." They talked for hours, David sharing stories about his life after the Marines, his transition to civilian life, the challenges and joys of fatherhood. Sarah told him about her work, about the changes she was trying to make in military culture. When they finally said goodbye, David hugged her tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for my life, for my daughter's life, for caring enough to run into hell for people you barely knew." "Thank you for serving," Sarah said, "and thank you for giving me a reason to believe it all mattered." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, looking at the tattoo on her arm. The anchor, the cross, the date. For so long, it had been a private memorial, a personal reminder of the worst and best day of her life. But now it had become something more, a symbol, a story, a legacy. She thought about Morrison and the other SEAL candidates, now out in the world serving their country. She thought about Jennifer and the other young women who were fighting for their place in the military. She thought about David and his daughter Emma, living the life that Sarah had fought to preserve. The journey hadn't been easy. She'd faced doubt, discrimination, mockery, and dismissal. She'd had to prove herself over and over again. But in doing so, she'd paved the way for others. She'd shown that courage wasn't about gender or physical strength. It was about the willingness to stand up when others fell down, to fight when giving up would be easier, to care when coldness would be safer. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Chief Daniels. "New class starts Monday. We could use your expertise. Interested." She smiled and typed back, "I'll be there." Because that's what warriors did. They showed up. They did the work. They saved lives. And they inspired the next generation to do the same. The tattoo on her arm caught the light, an anchor, holding steady in the storm. A cross remembering those lost. A date marking the day everything changed. But more than that, it was a promise. A promise that as long as she had breath in her body, she would be the anchor for those who needed it. She would be the steady presence in the chaos. She would be the hope in the darkness. And she would never, ever let anyone tell her she didn't belong. The mockery had turned to respect. The doubt had turned to admiration. And the tattoo that had once been dismissed as pretty was now recognized for what it truly was, a mark of extraordinary courage, a symbol of selfless sacrifice, and a reminder that heroes come in all forms. Sarah looked out her window at the darkening sky, thinking about tomorrow, about the new candidates she would meet, about the lives she might save. "Ready for another round," she said to herself, and she meant it. Because some battles were won with weapons and some with words. But the most important battles, the ones that really changed the world, were won with courage, character, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost.